Okay, good morning everyone and welcome. My name's Simon Barclay and as it's now 10 o'clock, I'll open the Phase 2 hearings of the examination of the York Local Plan 2017 to 2033. First of all, can everyone hear me well enough? Okay, very good, excellent, thank you. So I said welcome. This is of course a welcome back for many of you, and it has been some time since the last hearing sessions, and a rather difficult time at that, I think it's fair to say. So we do hope that you haven't suffered too badly as a result of the pandemic and have come through relatively unscathed. So we're glad to see you all here this morning. The more observant among you might notice that the chap to my right isn't Andrew McCormack. He has, unfortunately and reluctantly, it's fair to say, had to step back from this examination due to health issues, not COVID-related. I am now joined, though, by my colleague Paul Griffiths, and I'll maybe ask Mr. Griffiths to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me as well. Good. Well, I will introduce myself. Paul Griffiths. I've been an inspector for some time. My professional background is as an architect. I'm also a member of the Institute of Historic Building Conservation. And I'm the other inspector who's been now appointed by the Secretary of State to independently examine the plan, as Simon referred to. To carry on, you will have met or been in contact with our programme officer, Carol Crooks. She's an independent officer of the examination. She works under our guidance, undertaking the administration of the examination and acting as a conduit for communication between us and the various participants. She works very hard to make sure everything runs smoothly. So if there is anything you want to raise with us that's not dealt with during the hearing sessions themselves, then please go to Ms. Crooks in the first instance. As most of you will know, but I'll clear this up anyway, our task is to consider whether the plan meets the requirements of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 as amended and the associated regulations, and given the point at which it was submitted, whether it is sound in the context of the now otherwise superseded 2012 version of the National Planning Policy Framework. I still have my dog-eared copy, thankfully. To be found sound in the light of that 2012 version, the document must be seen to be positively prepared. That is based on a strategy which seeks to meet objectively assessed development and infrastructure requirements, including unmet requirements from neighbouring authorities, where it is reasonable to do so, and consistent with achieving sustainable development. Secondly, it must be justified. That is the most appropriate strategy when considered against the reasonable alternatives and based on proportionate evidence base. It needs to be effective, that is deliverable over the planned period and based on effective joint working on cross-boundary strategic priorities. And finally, it needs to be consistent with national policy. This examination must consider whether the document satisfies a series of legal and procedural requirements, including the local development scheme and the statement of community involvement, the relevant regulations, whether it has been subject to sustainability appraisal, habitats regulations assessment, whether it complies with national policy, whether it as regards to the sustainable community strategy for the area, and last but not least, whether the duty to cooperate has been fulfilled. Okay, I'll try and speak up. I am sorry. Our starting point, as is normal on these occasions, is that the Council has submitted what it considers to be a sound plan. Those seeking changes to it have to demonstrate why it is not sound and how their suggested changes would make it sound. Now, as I understand it, and forgive me if I've got this a bit askew, but the Council has already put forward a number of main modifications to the plan that were consulted upon some time ago, and the Council has also carried out further work in some areas. Now, any further changes proposed by the Council or others should only be advanced if they are necessary to make the plan sound. The Council is free to make minor changes as it so wishes. We don't need to consider those. The examination is focused entirely on the question of soundness, and our eventual report will only specify changes that are needed to make the plan sound. Should it be that we decide that main modifications are necessary, and if such modifications might prejudice any party who would be denied a fair opportunity to comment, then it would be necessary to carry out further consultation before the plan could be modified. Sustainability appraisal and habitat regulations assessment might also be necessary. As these hearings progress, and I know this is a difficult task, but please, the Council will have to maintain a running schedule of any changes it proposes, supports, or has no objections to. This schedule should show additions in bold, deletions in strike-through, and a column giving a proper explanation of why the specific change is considered necessary. Hopefully, this should be complete within 1 week of the final hearing session, but we're able to be flexible on that if necessary. It will be a public document and it will be published, even if it is not eventually consulted upon. And to be absolutely clear, and I'm sure you'll understand this, we may or may not accept the changes that are put forward. As far as these hearing sessions are concerned, phase 2, as my colleague has already alluded to, we intend to cover the strategic vision, outcomes and development principles today. That is the big picture, as you might put it. Economic development is scheduled for tomorrow. Housing need and requirement on Thursday, and as things stand, Friday is held in reserve. Next week, we'll move on to spatial strategy, housing land supply, and the approach to setting greenbelt boundaries. A week after that, infrastructure requirements, delivery and development viability, the questions around climate change, and there's also a virtual session programmed. All this is, of course, set out in the hearing schedule that has already been circulated. Following these hearings, or this set of hearings, if we consider that there's a reasonable chance of the plan being found sound in relation to these phase 2 matters, then we'll move on to phase 3. Phase 3 is currently programmed for July 2022, so not too far away. The guidance note that accompanied the hearing schedule outlines the procedure that will be followed at these sessions, the way in which written reps will be dealt with, and the general availability of information. As most of you will understand, the hearings take the form of a structured discussion, which we will lead, generally following the matters and issues paper that has been circulated. There's nothing separate being circulated beyond that. There are no other agendas. We will invite the Council to make an opening statement at each hearing session, and after that we'll invite people to speak at particular times. But if you have something to contribute, then please indicate. I think that the general approach is to do that. That's what I've seen done previously. But waving hand or any other indication is fine. We've kept the timetable quite tight, so I would ask that everyone focuses on the important matters, and then we don't have to deal with anything extraneous. And in particular today, as I've said, it's a big picture question. Each day we'll take a short break mid-morning and mid-afternoon, and we'll have a longer break for lunch, hopefully. There are a number of housekeeping matters that I was going to deal with, but I was approached earlier. Somebody else is going to do that for me. So, do you want to do that now?
Yeah, just a couple of things to be aware of. First of all, I presume you'll sign in on the desk at the front, and you can sign every day. So in terms of fire alarms, there's no scheduled alarm to go today, so if there is an alarm, it's to notify. If it doesn't make your way out the building by the front entrance and come break the corner of Gilly Gate and
Forgive me. Could everyone hear what they should do if there is a fire? Just about. Well,
good.
If you follow me, you'll be fine.
Okay. Thank you very much. That covers it much more fully than I was going to, but thank you. I don't have anything else I need to say at this point. I don't know, Sam. No, nothing for you. I wonder if you'd mind. I'm going to go around the room and ask everyone to introduce themselves. Feels a little informal, but it'd be useful, I think. So, can I start with the council's team?
Good morning. I'm David Elvin, Queen's Counsel, appearing for the City of York, along with Scott Linus, who became Queen's Counsel after the Phase 1 sessions, I'm happy to say, and Matthew Henderson, who is assisting us. Thank you.
Congratulations, Mr. Linus.
I have the photographs.
Good morning. My name's Dilma Mode. I'm a local plan project officer for the council. Thank you.
Councillor Nigel Eyre, I'm the executive member with responsibility for the local plan.
I'm John Oxley, formerly city archaeologist here, independent consultant now on the council's team.
Thank you. I'm Mark Lane from DPP, representing various parties.
Emma Winter from Carter Jonas, representing L&Q Estates.
I'm Phil Bixby, representing York Environment Forum.
Alistair Willis from Lichfields, representing Bellway Homes.
George Wright, I'm representing myself. I'm a Chartered Town Planner, and I have a couple of procedural matters I'd like to deal with before we get underway. Thank you.
I'll carry on with the introductions first. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name's Neil Jones of Rapley's, representing British Sugar.
Good morning. Mark Johnson from Johnson Mowat, representing Redrow Homes and Taylor Wimpey.
Morning. Paul Butler, representing TW Fields.
Morning. Mary Cook of Council, Town Legal, representing the Langwith Development Partnership.
Good morning, Tom Robinson from JLL, representing IPIF.
Good morning, Joanna Gabrielatsu from JLL, representing NHS Property Services.
Michael Corsier, Fulford Parish Council.
Morning everyone, Stuart Natkus from Barton Wilmore, now Stantec, on behalf of Barrett David Wilson Homes.
Sarah Worthington from Ayrden Planning, representing Mr Harrison, a local resident.
Thank you. Should we deal with the procedural points first? Yeah. Carry on then.
Thank you, sir. Two brief points. Firstly, that when we did the hearing statements, we obviously hadn't seen what everybody else was going to say, and therefore I felt it necessary to book myself in for this session and matter 7. But I'm quite happy that my hearing statement says what I want to say, and I've nothing particularly I want to address today, so I would intend not to say anything, but to reserve what I have to say to matter 7, when I really just want to make one statement to you, which I hope will be helpful to your decision, and it will probably take me 10 minutes to deliver it. In session 7 at the beginning. My second point is just some clarification. There is a document, TP1, that is dated May 2018. It doesn't appear in the examination library. It appears in the library that deals with the core documents and evidence base. But it was not a document that was available in the consultation that was completed in April 2018. To me, it seems that it's an appropriate document that should be in the examination base, but I would just like some clarification on what its status is, because it certainly wasn't a document that was the subject of comment in consultation.
Can you tell me what the document covered?
Topic 1, Greenbelt.
That was one of the submitted documents, and it was discussed in the Phase 1 sessions, and it's been revised because of the comments that you and Mr McCormick passed back to us after the Phase 1 sessions, and so the TP1 revisions are in the inquiry library, and now they represent the current position on the Green Belt.
Yeah, it's the Green Belt. Is it called the Green Belt topic paper? Is that right? Addendum, yeah.
It's inquiry documents EXCYC 1818A through to 18F.
What's your concern about that, Mr. Wright?
Sir, my concern is I just want it to be made very clear that this is not part of the evidence base of the plan when it was submitted. It is a subsequent document delivered to justify the proposals.
It was part of the submitted plan, and it's been part of the examination since the examination began. And with respect to Mr. Wright, of course, part of the reason for this process is to examine the material and to submit new material in any event, as we've done with the TP1 addendum. Local plan processes, as you know, sir, are iterative processes, hence the revisions to the sustainability appraisal as we've gone on, including the latest one from last year.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Wright?
In a word, no, sir. It just fudges the point. Is it part of the original evidence base upon which the plan was based? And if so, it was not there available when the consultation was made. I just need to know whether it was part of the original evidence base upon which the consultation was made, or is a subsequent document. If it's a subsequent document, it seems to me it should be in the examination library.
If we're talking about the same document, hopefully we are, my understanding is that it was submitted originally with alongside the plan.
Yes, sir, but the document is shown on the website as being part of the core documents and evidence base, and therefore to a person coming along now and reading that would see that on the face of it as being part of the evidence base upon which the submitted plan was based. And clearly, it was not in the consultation, and it's dated May 2018, which is after the consultation had been completed. It seems to me it is not of that nature, and that should be made clear to everyone who looks at the website. And the way to make it clear will be to put it into the examination library.
Well, what do you want us to do about it? Put it in the examination library? Well, in its original form?
If that was done, that would clarify what its status is for me. Thank you.
Well, am I right? And I'm happy to be corrected. But if it's been modified and changed subsequently and now has a different form, we're proceeding on the basis of the revised documents of the original document.
Sorry, sir, you're not. All the other documents are described as addendums, and every one of them is described as an addendum, so it is still a live document.
I'm somewhat confused now. Mr. Oven, can you help me with that?
It is an addendum because it's a revised version of TP1, and with respect to Mr. Wright, reading the introduction to TP1, it makes it perfectly clear that it's a revision and clarification of our position on the Green Belt, following on from the inspector's observations following the Phase 1 hearings. It represents our position on the Green Belt now and effectively supersedes the original TP1. It's called an addendum because it's a further document on the Green Belt. I'm sorry if the use of the word addendum's confused anybody, but Mr. Wright can rest assured that it's effectively a replacement.
I think we'll move on. I think that helps me, as long as I'm understanding that correctly. The council wanted to make some opening statements. Carry on.
Thank you, Inspectors, and good morning, everyone. For those who do not know me, or perhaps don't recognise me, given I've grown a full beard since the last time I introduced at the Phase 1 hearings, my name is Councillor Nigel Eyre, and I'm the Executive Member responsible for the development of the local plan at City of York Council. Firstly, on behalf of City of York Council, I would like to begin by welcoming the Inspectors, Simon Barclay and Paul Griffiths, and members of the public here for attending for this public examination. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Programme Officer, Carol Crooks, for her management of the examination process and for carrying out the work behind the scenes to facilitate these hearings. This has been an exceptionally challenging couple of years, and I would like to thank the government inspectors and all those involved who've managed to progress this plan despite the incredibly difficult circumstances. We are confident this is a robust and sound plan and look forward to the next stage of the hearings. I still think that the York plan is a positive strategy, one which will successfully secure the delivery of sustainable community facilities, facilitate economic growth in the city, and crucially, build the homes that York needs, all whilst maintaining the special and historic character of the city. The role of the plan is to balance the need for housing and employment growth with protecting York's unique natural and built environment. This is a key part of the spatial strategy and site identification process and underpins the work undertaken to support the local plan. York remains a special place to live, and many residents feel strongly connected to this wonderful city. The geography of our city means it is also a diverse city, and the local plan has been designed to be flexible enough to adapt to these differences. I still fundamentally believe that the York local plan is sound, and this is because it achieves a balance that is right for our city. It is incredibly important that we continue to build on the progress to date on the local plan and work with inspectors to take this plan forward to adoption. The ongoing work during the examination has taken an enormous amount of work from a professional and dedicated team of council officers, many of whom live in the city and care about the city's future. And I would like to thank them and the team for their efforts. I was also going to introduce John Oxley to give a far more expert view on the historic character of the city.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre, and thank you, Inspectors, and good morning, everyone. I'm John Oxley. I'm an independent archaeological consultant and co-director of Big Ideas by the Sea, Scarborough's first festival of ideas, which starts a week on Friday, so I hope to see you all there. Between 1989 and 2019, I was city archaeologist for the City of York Council. As Councillor Eyre has stated, York is a special place, and heritage is at the core of what makes York special and consequently underpins the strategic vision of the City of York local plan. People have subsisted, lived, worked, died in this part of the Vale of York for over 10,000 years. And over this period, we as humans have transformed the landscape of this area so that York today has become the preeminent historic city that we know as we know it. For many centuries, York was the second city of England, at times a centre of government. Developing around a strategic tidal river crossing, it was at the centre of a network of national and European communications and trading links, particularly since its establishment by the Romans in 71 AD. For nearly 8,000 years prior to the establishment of Iberacum in 71 AD, the area that we now call the City of York developed from river valleys and forests exploited by hunter-gatherers into a complex rural landscape at the beginning of the 1st century AD. This landscape was a mosaic of small fields, clusters of roundhouses, common lands and managed woodlands, managed rivers and watercourses, all linked together by a network of trackways. It was the setting for burial activities and the construction of large-scale earthworks. From 71 AD, York goes on to become the outstanding example of urban development originating with Roman occupation in northwestern Europe. It has exceptional evidence of its Roman origins and of all successive periods up to the modern day. Evidence for these periods is preserved in the town plan, in the buildings, the archaeological deposits, the artefacts, and the documents and the outstanding archives that are held within the city. Roman York, Iberacum, capital of Britannia Inferior, is evidenced by extensive above and below ground remains of the Roman fortress and colonia and the key roads leading into the city. In the 7th to 9th centuries, the Anglo-Saxon city Ephrwich became a centre of power, belief, trade and learning, and it was home to Alcuin, the great, the outstanding European scholar of the 8th and 9th centuries. In the 9th and 10th centuries, Jorvik was the centre of a Viking kingdom with occupation and trade evident in new streets, house plots, new forms of urban housing, and the exceptionally well-preserved organic deposits that has preserved a wealth of objects that normally decay in other cities. After 1066 AD, Norman influence survives in 2 castles and the near-complete circuit of defences. The medieval town's wealth and development is evident from the minster and the historic urban churches and their exceptional stained glass and the many outstanding timber-framed buildings. Significant post-Reformation development includes 18th century Georgian domestic, civic and administrative architecture. It includes the 19th century scientific institutions, the Yorkshire Philosophical Society, and of course the impact of the railways from the 1830s onwards. Since the mid-20th century, heritage has been effectively managed and conserved alongside residential and commercial regeneration and often sympathetic contemporary architectural interventions. And since 71 AD, York has assimilated peoples and cultures that have influenced the urban development of this city into this incredibly well-defined, compact, historic core. Extending beyond the historic core of the city are the areas of industrial development and housing that marked the expansion of the city in the 19th and 20th century. This topographic expansion has been defined by the historic strays, the green wedges, whose origins lie in the centuries, or perhaps millennia, before the Norman conquest. The heritage of the city is of outstanding universal value, and in our view meets the UNESCO criteria to be considered a World Heritage Site. Therefore, the city has resolved to apply in July this year to be placed on the new United Kingdom tentative list of World Heritage Sites. All of the interactions I've talked about here with the environment and landscape and the transformational episodes which have impacted and created the city in which we live have been assessed and analysed and presented in the City of York Heritage Topic Paper Update 2014. The Heritage Topic Paper sets out 6 principal characteristics that have been used to test the impact of local plan proposals on the heritage of this special place. This work places heritage at the core of the local plan strategic vision, outcomes and development principles. And it's ensured that the plan provides a clear and appropriate framework for managing, conserving and enhancing the above and below ground heritage of the city. Heritage, therefore, sirs, is key to the future development of this city, the quality of life of its residents, and to retaining, attracting and promoting businesses that will provide sustainable employment and a sustainable future for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, John. The Council is keen to adopt the local plan and begin to implement policies that will benefit the city and achieve our aspirations to build more homes, create a sustainable city, foster new communities and ensure the special character of York remains established for many years to come. We therefore welcome the second phase of this examination in public and look forward to the constructive discussions ahead to assist the inspectors.
Thank you both. Who would like to go first? Well, we've set out some questions that we wanted to address in matter 1, essentially covering policies DP1 to DP4, which were covered. The first of those was whether these strategic elements of the plan, as set out in DP1, 2 and 3 principally, they provide a clear and appropriate framework for the strategic policies set out in what comes afterwards. That was the question we asked. There were a number of representations on that matter. Does anyone want to make a submission? Thank you.
I'm very happy, sir, to kick off. Mary Cook, representing LDP, currently SS13, land west of Elvington Lane, just to remind you, as it were, why we're here. And we made a number of points, and I might as well deal with them all now, if now is as good a time as any. So, we, broadly speaking, sir, were supporting the vision. We are looking to suggest some better linkage between the outcomes in that first box. So the vision and the outcomes are currently in one box in the plan on page 16. And first of all, we are suggesting that there needs to be an additional outcome, and that relates to addressing climate change. And then we pick that up again in our suggested additions to DP3. And the reason we are suggesting that there needs also to be a better linkage between the stated outcomes in that first box and then the development principles in DP1. I think we seem to be the only people making that kind of a point, but it all goes to monitoring and managing the plan more effectively. And so we give an example. So we think, for example, DP1, little Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3 all support achieving outcome 1. And it's not uncommon to see a sort of connections, an explicit connection between your outcomes and your development principles. It may seem a bit of a development management nerdy point, but actually I think it's a good point. So the other point that we are raising is about the mechanics of a review mechanism. Now, whether or not there should be a review mechanism, the underlying reason for that may be something that will be something that I think will get touched upon in more detail in your economic session and your numbers session. But it seems to us very clear that here we are in 2022 trying to deal with a plan that was promoted back in the day under the 2012 MPPF, and the consequence of the difference between the 2012 and the 2021, as we sit here, MPPF, is such, the differences are such, that we feel that there's going to need to be a prompt review, and that you need to spell that out in this first chapter. So whether that's, for example, because of the difference between the standard methodology housing number figure and some kind of an OAN-based figure or not, the mechanics of the plan, it seems to us, clearly demand that needs to be grappled with in this chapter of the plan. And it probably isn't, now is probably not the right moment to delve into any more detail than that, save to say that, you know, for those reasons, we don't think simply relying on the development plan regulations is good enough, and that we need a specific policy, and we've ventured to suggest one. And then the other major thing, which I might as well mention now, which affects me rather than anybody else sitting in the room, is the suggestion that we are making that one of the another option that we are inviting you to have an open mind about at day one of phase 2 is the suggestion that the new garden village is dealt with not as a straight allocation for X, but is identified as a broad location for growth. And again, without getting into the specifics of that, why that might be an appropriate option at this point, were that to be an attractive option, it would need to be dealt with, we think, in this chapter of the plan. And again, we have suggested some wording in order to encompass the broad location as opposed to the specific allocation. There's another point that I think is worth perhaps just fleshing out, and that's about DP4. DP4, the approach to development management, is based on effectively the 2012 MPPF, and that would be to have a policy in an adopted plan which would be contrary to the current MPPF, which we think is a bit of a nonsense. Bearing in mind you've got your hands tied behind your back because you're examining this in the context of the 2012 MPF, it seems to us that the best thing to do is in fact is either not to have this particular policy and to leave it to the decision maker to pick up the correct approach in making any development management decision, taking into account the MPPF 2021 or whatever one it might be, as another material consideration. But it doesn't seem very sensible to have a policy based on that old paragraph in the MPPF, which would not be the right paragraph for development management decisions in today's policy world. I think that's the only other thing that I think is worth a comment at this stage, and I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Is there anything the council wants to say in response to that?
Yes. I'm going to ask, sorry, not allow, it's not for me to allow it, Ms. Dilma Mode to address some of the substantive points about the amendment in a moment. In summary, we think they're unnecessary. This is a vision statement, and the matters raised are all subject to detailed policies later on. Can I just deal with the other points? The general issue with regard to review, we're resistant at this stage, subject to your guidance, as to a review provision for two reasons. Firstly, we have Regulation 10A that requires a 5-yearly review, but more pressingly, the new North Yorkshire Unitary Authority comes into existence in April of next year. It's in shadow form at the moment. All of the councils of North Yorkshire, other than the city...
My apologies, Mr. Irving. When did you say that was?
April 2023.
April next year.
It's the shadow authority is in existence now. The order's been laid, as far as I'm aware, and it will, of course, begin its planning process as soon as it comes into existence. And the City of York will undoubtedly wish to review its position in line with it's virtually surrounded, other than on the eastern side where you've got the East Yorkshire Unitary Authority. It will want to align itself with planning policies emerging for the new Unitary Authority. So the likelihood is there will be a review once that is known, but of course we're slightly in the hands of the new authority as to when its plan will first be published. But there are therefore pragmatic reasons for not wanting to put a timescale on it, other than the legal requirement in Regulation 10A, but a very clear pragmatic reason why it's likely to come forward in any event, quite apart from the NPPF issue. And I just remind you of paragraph 62 of the local plan-making provisions of the PPG. We've got a local circumstance here, which is the new unitary authority, which will dictate the timetable with respect. Secondly, the broad...
So just forgive me again, just before you move on. Yeah, just to help me out, the new unitary authority, what area does that encompass?
The entire county council, other than the City of York. Only the City of York's been carved out of it. So other than the East Yorkshire side, York will be surrounded on 3 sides by the new unitary authority. So if you look at a map of the county council administrative area and just exclude the city,
so right. So it doesn't include York. Does it include East Riding?
No, that's got its own unitary authority.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
So if you take the authorities immediately adjacent to York, which is Selby, Harrogate, Hambleton, Rydale, they will all become part of the unitary authority. On the broad location for growth point that Ms Cook made, which is set out in general terms in the quad representations for Langwith, that is not something that the council is minded to support, and certainly the information that's been provided to date for the reasons for changing from the allocation are not sufficiently clear or robust for us to understand the change. It's a matter I'll try and progress outside the inquiry in due course, but at the moment that we're resisting that. And finally, DP4, it doesn't have as much detail as the new MPPF paragraph 11, but it's not inconsistent with it. Thank you. And Ms Dilma Mode will just deal briefly with the suggestions about the drafting additions that Quad have suggested should be included.
Thank you. I'd just like to deal with the nerdy DM point, which I'm also hugely concerned about and interested in. So as outlined in the Council's Matter 1 hearing statement, the vision reflects the Council's corporate strategy objectives. But in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.16, the plan also articulates how the implementation of the plan policies, the development plan policies that follow in the remainder of the plan are intended to deliver the outcomes and intended to deliver the vision articulated in this section of the plan. DP 1 to 3 reflect evidence about the social, environmental and economic context outlined in section 1 of the plan, as well as the MPPF, and it's just been picked up on. It's consistent with the MPF 2012, but certainly isn't inconsistent rather with the new MPPF as published. While at 1.1 of our statement, we describe the development principles as cross-cutting policies that underpin the remainder of the the plan. But DP1 to 3 are more accurately referred to as principles, and these principles underpin and set the parameters for the policies that follow in Section 3 and other sections of the plan, and they guide other policies.
Sorry, do forgive me. Could I ask you maybe just to pull your microphone a little bit closer to you? I couldn't hear you.
Is that better?
That well.
Yeah.
Try again.
Okay. Just to repeat what I said. So we describe these policies as development principles because they underpin and set the parameters for the policies that follow in the remainder of the plan, giving a clear statement of the overall planning policy content that the Council is seeking to achieve through the cumulative implementation of those policies. As to the detailed suggestions around the changes to the policies in this section of the plan posed by LDP, we don't think they add to the effectiveness or clarity of the policies as they are stated. So, for example, some of the more minor references around flood management, we think the intent of the policies is really clear, and so I don't know that it will add anything to the policies as stated. Sorry, I think that's everything. I could go into detail on the detail of those policies, but a number of the suggestions are in any case picked up in later plan policies. I'm just mindful of time, but for example, the addition of reference to the biodiversity net gain or those sorts of issues, they are quite clearly dealt with in other plan policies. These would add repetition, I think, and again, not go to the clarity or effectiveness of the policies in this section of the plan. Review matters have already been dealt with, but I would also highlight there's a monitoring section of the plan in section 15, which clearly deals with the monitoring framework that we've established to keep the plan essentially under review. Thank you.
Ms. Cook, was there anything you wanted to say in response to that?
I just wanted to come back on Mr. Elvin's observation in relation to this new body and remind you that, as you know, I think, understand, the City of York is not in that shadow authority. There are elections in next year in the city. And so I don't think the fact that there is a shadow authority should in any way detract you from the need for a review of the plan, which as I understand it, is one of the reasons why the Council are seeking to resist, on the face of it, the review and simply rely upon Regulation 10A. So I'm keen for there to be a specific policy which commits to a review. I appreciate, of course, councils can do what they will in relation, respond as they like in relation to policies like that. But nevertheless, it's important that, in our view, that such a policy be in the plan. And the only other observation is my specific suggestion that one of the outcomes should include this reference to climate change. I can't understand why the council would be against that. After all, that they've declared a climate change emergency. Seems pretty obvious to me that that should be an outcome in that box.
Mr. Elvin.
With respect, I think Ms Cook's misunderstood my point about the review. I was making the point, not that there won't be a review, but that pragmatically we can't give you a precise timescale because of the need to coordinate with the new unitary authority. The only point about the shadow authority was that it's already in existence, but that the new authority doesn't legally come into existence until next April and can only begin its plan making when it gets to that point. We will want to coordinate with them. It is likely that any review will take place in advance of the 5-year requirement in the regs, but we can't say precisely when yet. And a policy which says no more than Regulation 10A and the PPG isn't a policy that's worth including in the plan. We're already subject to that duty, and the practical pressures of needing to see where the unitary authority is going is what will drive the position most likely, and that will then incorporate updating for the standard method and all the other requirements to bring it in line with current national policy. I mean, this is simply a consequence of the fact we're still operating under transitional provisions, which I seem to recall we discussed last time.
Might I just deal with the climate change point as well? So the Council acknowledged that since submission of the plan, we've had the climate change declaration, and in the Matter 8 statement that we've submitted, we have tabled some changes to update on that. But I would suggest that these changes do not amend the policy intent as stated in Section 2 of the plan, but rather reinforce the development principles that are already in there and align it more closely with the language used in the MPPF and in recent policy statements by the Council in relation to climate change matters.
Mrs Cook, just for the avoidance of my doubt, Mrs Cook, this reference to climate change, is that something that you are suggesting is necessary for soundness?
Is there anything we need to add about that? Clearly, that's going to have to be something we need to consider. There are a number of other nameplates on their side. Mr. Jones?
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me okay? Good, okay. So as explained earlier, I'm representing British Sugar. And just to give a little bit of sort of context for you, so as at the start, British Sugar is obviously the owner of the former British Sugar site. The British Sugar site forms the substantial part of allocation ST1 with Manor School, or former Manor School. And together those sites are identified within draft policy SS6 as delivering approximately 1,200 dwellings as part of a residential-led mixed-use development, incorporating associated community and neighbourhood facilities. British Sugar has been working with City of York Council for many years since the closure of the British Sugar factory to progress and enable its sustainable redevelopment for residential-led mixed uses, and as part of that work, British Sugar has secured both outline and full planning permissions, as detailed in our written statements, to enable that development. My presence here today is part of British Sugar's demonstration to their ongoing commitment to the delivery of the site. And we continue to work very closely with the council in that respect, with a view to delivering homes and associated development on the site in line with the housing trajectory as set out in the draft plan. Turning specifically to matter one for today, the strategic vision, outcomes and development principles, I simply want to reiterate our support in general terms for matter one and the strategic vision. British Sugar has, in our previous representations, focused our comments on the spatial strategy and clearly the site allocation itself. But that spatial strategy and site allocation follow on from, clearly, the strategic vision, outcomes and principles set out within Section 2 of the plan. And in that context, the strategic vision refers at paragraph 2.5 to the delivery of the major sustainable urban regeneration at British Sugar, and therefore to the extent that the vision results in the allocation of the British Sugar site as a substantial part of strategic allocation ST1, they are supported. And it's considered they provide a clear and appropriate framework for the strategic policies that relate to the development of the British Sugar site. We consider it to be a justified approach on the basis that its inclusion as one of the strategic site allocations represents the most appropriate strategy for achieving the strategic vision. And we consider it's an approach that's based on robust evidence in the form of our previous representations, the extant planning permissions that enable the delivery of the site, and British Sugar's confirmed commitment to the site's delivery. It's also considered to represent an effective approach on the grounds that the delivery of the British Sugar site has been tested through the assessment of the now approved planning permissions and has been proven as deliverable over the plan period. And lastly, we consider it to be an approach that's consistent with national policy on the basis that the development of the British Sugar site will enable the delivery of the sustainable development of the site in accordance with policies in the framework. So in terms of matter one, we want to offer our support to the Council. Clearly, the detailed policy requirements for the allocated sites are set out in the later sections of the local plan. And we will look forward to offering our comment and assistance on those matters in due course. Thank you.
Was there, Mr. Jones, anything about the vision, outcomes and development principles that you wanted to object to?
Excuse me, not at this stage, no.
Okay, thank you.
Presumably, Mr. Elvin, there's nothing in that you'll need to come back on?
Other than to say thank you, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want everything to get too cosy in here. It's rather more helpful to us when we hear about, well, the problems that people think that there are with the plan. So I don't want to go around the table and hear from everyone about how they're happy with it. That's sort of the council's job, really. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, you can say.
Thank you, Sarah. I made one minor technical objection to DP3, but I'll come back to that in a moment. I think my nameplate went up on a response to the comments made by Mary Cook. I think it is right, when you look at the plan as it's currently drafted, in that first section on the joint working and the relationship approach to how we work with the neighbouring authorities. I think it is right that there is an element of updating to the text. I only say that on the basis that we're told is that this new unitary authority is likely to be in place in April next year, and I'm not saying this plan won't be adopted by then, but on the basis of its track record, it could be that we have a set of new neighbours by the time this plan is adopted. And when I say new neighbours, it's a different authority. And I do think it's right, is that somehow we have to reference a review process. I'm not suggesting that we actually set a date, but I think it's right and relevant that we set a review process on the basis that we don't know what the spatial policies of that new unitary authority are going to be right now. But what we do know is that the relationship in this plan between York and Selby is about a common housing market area. What we don't know is what Selby is going to do with its housing need relationship with the rest of those other authorities as to what push and pull factors they may adopt. So I think there is a need to do a little bit of an updating to the plan text and quite possibly reference a review. My other more minor technical objection to policy DP3 was actually to do with the standards on bullet point 3, where all of the requirements in the rest of the policy require it to meet the high standards, and yet under the third bullet point it was the highest standard. And our objection was, in terms of the highest standard, is that, I think it was to do with environmental testing in effect, is that the highest standards are forever changing and have not been tested under the viability appraisal. Having said that...
Very, very sorry, Mr Johnson. I have seen this in your statement, but can you just remind me, I know you just said it, but I didn't catch it, whereabouts in the plan that was?
It's in DP3, and it's the third bullet point. I'll just pull that up.
It's the fourth bullet, isn't it?
Sorry, it's the fourth bullet point. Is that you see in the DP3 is that bullet point 2 is to deliver high quality. The third bullet point is to create high quality, and the fourth one is to ensure the highest standards. And our objection was to the word the highest standards of sustainability, on the basis that the standards of sustainability are constantly changing, and we were seeking a swap at that point to the word high rather than highest. And our objection was that the highest standards had actually not been tested in the viability testing. Although, what I will come on to is a point in matter 6, is that we actually now have more up-to-date testing on the viability for changes in the building regulations. I see that as a relatively minor comment with respect to DP3. All the other references are absolutely fine.
Mr. Elvin? A point of information, the unitary authority is, as I've said, the order's been made. It's the North Yorkshire Structural Changes Order 2022. And it's statutory instrument 2022 number 328. And it provides that the authority legally comes into force on the 1st of April of next year. That's Article 1, Sub-Article 2. On whether we're happy to include something in the text which records the fact that we will need, what was said is entirely why I said what I said earlier, we will need to, obviously, to consult and liaise with the new unitary authority when it comes into existence. I'm content that something can go into the explanatory text. It doesn't need a policy. And we'll suggest a form of words in due course, so that is at least recorded. It doesn't require a policy change. On the question of whether we should adopt a lower standard than higher standards of sustainability, Ms. Dilma Mode will comment.
Thank you. So the reference to highest possible standards is in any case limited and clarified by other policies in the plan, policy C1 to C3, and all legal requirements with reference to the building regulations, for example, which will apply regardless of plan content, both of which, the policies and these merging legal requirements, have been tested in our viability appraisals. Reference to the highest sustainability standards is still relevant, as there may be instances where feasibility rather than viability limits what might be achieved, such as in the case of historic buildings, and this is provided for in the text to policy CC1, for example. Therefore, the development principle, going back to that DM and outcome point, is to seeking the highest standards is wholly appropriate and consistent with those later plan policies.
Can I just add to that, because of viability issues do not justify a reduction in the standards which the policies aim for, of course it may be a matter as to how that works out in principle, having regard to viability considerations for individual developments. That's not a reason for lowering the standards.
Mr. Corsia, I'm going to come to you.
Thank you, sir. Can I take you back to your own questions, I think, whether these policies provide a clear and appropriate framework for the strategic policies, and in particular whether they are going to be effective. And so I would also draw your attention to paragraph 154 of the MPPF, and of course I'm talking about the 2012 version when I refer to the MPF. And that says, only policies that provide a clear indication of how a decision maker should react to a development proposal should be included in the plan. That's the final sentence. So when we have a difficulty with DP1 little 3 about housing needs, so I think that that's a matter that's better dealt with under matter 2 rather than today, if that's your agreement. Other than that, sir, the policies DP1 and DP2 set a series of basically very high-level objectives, which is hard for anybody to disagree with. The difficulty is...
And yet some still are, Mr. Corsi.
Well, so that's my position anyway. The difficulty is that basically the policies don't recognise that there are potential conflicts between those objectives and doesn't provide any means by which those conflicts can be reconciled together. And as such, that is why we say it doesn't provide a clear and appropriate framework for the later strategic policies. And so I don't want to... there are numerous examples of this within the plan, and I really don't want to go through all those today, but I'll give you one. And so I'm not going to go into the merits of the proposal. I will just simply show the inconsistency within the plan about this proposal. And so obviously you have DP1-4, sir, which quite rightly says the further success of regionally and sub-regionally important higher and further educational institutions within the plan area is supported. So that's I think most people would agree with that. But that then, sir, is followed through by the policy SS22 and, of course, the strategic part, which is ST27. But then you have, indeed, sir, you then have to balance that, in our conclusion, with the other parts of DP1, particularly little 6, which say that York's outstanding historic and natural environment should be conserved and enhanced, and we support everything which John Oxley said about that earlier today. And, of course, DP2 takes that, DP2 little 3 takes that further, including the first bullet point, conserving those elements which contribute to the special character and setting of the historic city. And so those elements then, if you are given further, are then set out in the shapers, sir, which we discuss, I think it's matter 4. But sir, if you look at figure 3.1, which we obviously discussed in long detail at the phase 1 hearings, what you'll see is that proposal ST27 sits within an area which is part of the historic character and setting of York. And so then you read 3.5 about this. And the first sentence, sir, I think is highly illuminating. It says, technical work carried out by the council indicates that regardless of the extent to which the city may have to identify further land to meet its development requirements and needs, there are areas of land outside the existing built-up areas that should be retained as open land due to their role in preserving the historic character and setting of York. And that's then referenced to figure point 3.1. So you have a total inconsistency of how this policy has been interpreted for the spatial policies. And so there are many examples of this. I'm just giving you one today, and I don't want to go to the merits of that, the merits of whether that proposal is relevant or not. But the problem with DP1 and 2 is because it has no vehicle to balance these competing objectives, it's not effective as a policy, or not effective as policies. So if I leave it at that, because I think these are matters we'll go into later on in these hearings.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm grateful for the examples, and I understand the points that you're making. So thank you for that.
Mr. Elvin, did you want to come back on that?
Ms. Dilma Mode will address
Please do.
In connection with paragraph 154 of the MPPF, to begin with, as I outlined earlier, these development principles are about the policy intent, the outcomes that are sought to be achieved through the cumulative implementation of policies in the remainder of the plan. In that context, I think they are clear as to how development management officers, development partners across the city should be using those policies. I do think a number of the matters that have been raised subsequently do stray into matters that will be discussed later in sessions as acknowledged, including in the spatial strategy session. But in terms of the relationship between policies in the plan, I'll just highlight the role of the sustainability appraisal and the option selected, that option around a balanced approach to accommodating development needs of the city, which indeed is the purpose of the plan, with those other principles that have needed to factor into our approach to the spatial strategy, which again is set out very clearly in our sustainability appraisal. And I won't expand too much on that because no doubt we will revisit these matters later.
So just so I'm clear then, Ms. Dilma Mode, I think you're saying that so far as you see it, there isn't an inconsistency. Is that right?
I think the overall spatial strategy has to take into account, again, as reflected in the sustainability appraisal, a balanced approach, and that's the option that we've taken forward. And I think those have been the sort of cumulative effects and the interactions between those policies have been covered in detail in the sustainability appraisal.
If I can assist, I think what Ms. Dilma Mode is saying is that we've set our strategic objectives. How they work out in practice into the detailed policies, as she said, is covered in the sustainability appraisal, and Fulford have confused the role of the spatial principles with the judgments that have then been made to apply them in individual circumstances. There's not an inconsistency, there's a difference of judgment between ourselves and the parish council as to how those vision and strategic principles have been translated into concrete policies.